Welcome back to the Boss Hole Chronicles, everyone out there in the Boss Hole Transformation Nation. This is your host, John Brower, welcoming you to another installment of the Boss Hole Chronicles. Actually, this is a two-part episode, something I recorded a few months ago, and I've been very excited about sharing this with all of you out there because today you're going to get a chance to meet retired U.S. Army Colonel Jeffrey McCausland. You may recognize that name because earlier this year I had a chance to go to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania for an immersive leadership experience with Jeff and his company, Diamond 6. This is something he does for corporate groups, nonprofit organizations, and Diamond 6 offers these immersion experiences in different parts of the country, but using the lens of history and these well-known military engagements as a way to understand leadership today. As I said, Jeff is a retired colonel from the U.S. Army. He is the former dean of academics at the U.S. Army War College. He's a visiting professor of national security at Dickinson College and a national security consultant for CBS Radio and television. Just to give you a little bit of his professional background, he is the founder and CEO of Diamond 6 Leadership and Strategy. Make sure you go into the show notes. I will have a link to Diamond 6 in there. He has served as the Director for Defense Policy and Arms Control for the National Security Council staff in the White House, Director of European Studies at the U.S. Army War College, and the Officer for Strategic Planning in the Office of Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations and Plans in the Pentagon. He's got some credentials, but we are going to be talking about the lessons from not only the experience at Gettysburg, but also his book entitled Battle Tested, Gettysburg Leadership Lessons for 21st Century Leaders. And he co-authored this book with Tom Vossler. So get ready. Here is part one of my two-part episode with Jeff McCausland. You're going to love this. The Boss Hole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode. Well, Jeff McCausland, welcome to the Boss Hole Chronicles. Good to have you here.
John, it's a great honor and pleasure to be with you.
I'm so excited about this. Gosh, we met through a mutual client. And interestingly enough, we met out at the battlefield in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And our audience knows about that experience that I had. And I had a chance to meet you and other members of the Diamond 6 team. By the way, everybody go into the show notes, learn more about Diamond 6. And also Jeff's book, Battle Tested. Great book. But I wanted to have Jeff on here. I wanted to have you on here to talk more about how the timeless nature of leadership principles and how I just found it so effective about how you took us out onto the battlefield and the immersion of being in Gettysburg and realizing that all of these leadership principles that you talk about are present today, are very present today. So I'd love for, I think we can just jump right into it and start talking about it. How does that sound to you?
Sounds like a plan.
Well, I know that one of the definitions you like to use when it comes to leadership comes from one of our former presidents, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and of course, a noted leader of the Allied forces in World War II. Why don't you start there, if you don't mind, Jeff?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, John, because it seemed to me only appropriate to start off with a common definition when you talk to a group. So you have a common start point.
Okay.
And if we were to Google the word leadership for definitions, we'd get probably hundreds, and many of them would be quite long. But I was taken by this definition from Eisenhower, which is very simply, leadership is the ability to decide what has to be done and get others to want to do it. And I like that definition really for three reasons. Reason number one, obviously, it comes from a pretty doggone good leader. I mean, there's a guy who'd been a 5-star general. I think we forget that Eisenhower not only led U.S. forces in the invasion of Europe in 1944, but he commanded all the forces, all the Allied forces. So imagine trying to keep Winston Churchill, Charles de Gaulle, Field Marshal Montgomery, and George Patton all working together. Okay, think about that as a challenge. 4 bigger egos you could never find.
Right.
He went on to serve, of course, twice as president of the United States. And actually, historians today treat the Eisenhower presidency a lot more favorably than they did when he left office in 1960. A lot of people are unaware, but from the time he will leave the Army until he becomes president, Eisenhower was president of Columbia University, a very prestigious university in New York City.
Right.
So he's had these senior leadership roles across a number of things. Second thing I like about this definition is it's short, okay? I can remember this.
Yes.
Longer definition, no, but leadership is about deciding what has to be done, getting others to want. I can remember that one. I don't have to write it down. I got it. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, I like the second half of that definition, getting others to want to do it. Because you might assume, hell, if you've been a 5-star general and you've been president twice and you've been president of a major university, goodness gracious, all you got to do is give orders and everybody's going to rush off and work as hard as they can to please you. And I think what Eisenhower is suggesting very wisely, that your positional authority will get people to do things. I'm in charge and you're not.
Right.
But if I'm going to get maximum performance, I got to get them to buy into what this is all about.
Yep.
And then one of the biggest challenges I got is how much time am I going to spend trying to get buy-in? I'll never get 100% buy-in almost on anything.
Right.
How much time I got before I've got to execute and we got to move on?
Yes.
How much time have I got to do all that? And so that's why I like that definition. And I like to start there. And I also like, and I learned this from you as well, I think it's very important, that leadership is different from management. And that's not to say one's less important. They're both important. I'm sure you would agree. Poorly managed organizations fail.
Yeah.
But good management's about work standards, resource allocation, and organizational design. Controlling complex institutions. And the study of management will take you back to around the World War I when Harvard and other places started having MBA programs.
Right.
Leadership's about vision, motivation, and trust. And trust being the most important, I think, of all. Because I like to say trust is what glues the leader to his or her organization. They may follow you out of positional authority or comic amusement, but they're only going to follow you in a vigorous, in a committed fashion if they actually trust you as a human being.
Yes.
So it's about moving people into the future. It's about dealing with change. And I always like to say, I worked for a general in the Pentagon who used to say, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance a lot less.
Yes.
And what I enjoyed learning from you was thinking about this in terms that if you manage something or a group of people, you've got a position in a hierarchy. It might be a temporary position. You're a project manager for an individual project.
Right.
But I'm in charge of others. It's a hierarchy. And we all know how that works. Leadership you do from wherever you are in the organization. You can lead your boss. Smart bosses should want to be led. You can lead or led by your peers. You lead others, of course, which is what most of the literature is about. And then ultimately, you have to also think about leading yourself, which can be a real challenge.
Yeah. One thing, Jeff, that I absolutely remember from our discussions in Gettysburg, when you talked about the leadership in World War II, just to use that as a frame of reference, you had Dwight D. Eisenhower, you had leaders in the Allied forces. There were leaders in the Axis forces.
Sure.
But one of the distinctions you made is, you had leaders that were advocating and pressing really an evil mission, and there's a morality aspect to it, which I thought that distinction was really interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, because if you think about, that definition, leadership is about deciding what has to be done and getting others to want to do it.
Right.
Well, then you'd have to say Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot, Osama bin Laden were all fantastic leaders, right? Did they decide what it needed to be done in their twisted little minds?
Yep.
Yes, they did. Did they get others to want to do it? And sadly, in some cases, very enthusiastically. They certainly did.
Right.
Hitler did not do the Holocaust by himself. Osama did not do 9/11 by himself.
Right.
They inspired others. But so if we were talking to Ike right now, and we said, hey, General, by the way, he preferred being called General to Mr. President.
Did he really? I didn't know that.
He really did, yeah. Might we say, hey, that's a pretty good definition, but what about this integrity, character, ethics piece. And
Right.
I think Eisenhower would look at us and say, that's just a given. In a liberal, and I mean liberal with a small L,
Right.
democracy like
Right.
ours, if you're going to inspire trust over time in a group of people, they have to believe that you are a person of character, integrity, and ethics. In fact,
Yes.
Norman Schwarzkopf, who was my commander during Desert Storm and I worked for in the Pentagon, he would return to West Point after that particular conflict to speak to the cadets.
Hmm.
And he finally said to them about what he'd learned over the entirety of his career. He said, leadership's about two things: character and competence.
Mm.
He said, if you're incompetent, I might love you, but I'm not going to follow you because you're dangerous.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And the second thing is character, because I'm not going to follow you if I think you are an unethical or a person that lacks integrity.
That's interesting. I remember early on in my career, Stormin' Norman was, I mean, it was iconic. I mean, it was just, there was something about him. There was this charismatic just presence of confidence and this leadership. But I remember one thing he said: when put in charge, take charge. And again, it's when I've shared that with people, it's like, look, if you've got a responsibility, it doesn't mean that you're an abusive and coercive leader to take charge, but you have responsibility, and you have to make decisions that influence so many people. And that's where I want to go next. I love your take on decision making, and I think there are very relevant facets to this. One other thing really quick that we talk about during leadership development, and the idea of buy-in. A lot of times, and especially in a non-military setting, we have the benefit of, or leaders have more, I would say, license to get input from their team members or their direct reports. Sometimes in battle, of course, that doesn't happen. You have to give direct orders and put people in harm's way. But one of the things we say, if you want to get people to buy in, you got to let them weigh in. And when they feel like they have, and I think, would it be fair to say that this was a difference between like General Meade and Lee, correct? Meade actually would get the input from his generals, that reported to him, which was unique, but he'd also been in that position for a very short time, correct?
He had been in that position by the evening of the second day, which was the most fateful evening. This was the day before Pickett's charge.
Right.
He'd been in command a grand total of 4 days.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
And Lee had been in command 16 months at that point in time.
Right.
But, it's funny when you say this, because when I talk about the definition of leadership, to back up a little bit, I always ask groups, okay, what's the one thing a leader gets to do that nobody else gets to do? And I just stand there very quietly and wait for somebody to speak up.
Yeah.
And only about half the time does the group get it. And they go, oh, he or she decides. I go, yeah, that's exactly right.
Right. That's exactly right.
And not only do they decide when they're going to decide.
Mm-hmm.
So they control the organizational clock, which is an inelastic and invaluable resource. But we all have leadership styles. So by that fateful evening, to take us back to the 2nd of July, 1863, here are these two generals. They both know they have to make a really fateful decision for the next day. They both have, it's interesting, they both have the same choices. Let's walk through what we could do. I could surrender. Well, I don't think I'm going to do that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I could leave. I could attack, or I could defend. That's it. I'm done. Okay. Each of them have the same 4 decisions. But how they go about determining that is very, very different. And Lee takes his own counsel, talks to a few staff officers, does not meet with his principals at all that night, and makes his decision the next day, which ends up being Pickett's charge.
Right.
Meade, as you point out, calls all his generals together, listens to them, and ultimately takes a vote. Now, oddly, I think he had decided what he was going to do.
Right.
And there's a certain degree of going through the motions here. But maybe it was a matter of each one of them, though, to be a little bit appreciative of Lee, realizing I don't need to do that. I got the full trust and confidence of my people. I've been on. And in a way, that's good news, but it can be bad news. And I always tell people, beware of becoming the icon in your organization. I mean, who can walk up to the icon and say, boss, that is the stupidest idea that I've ever heard of. Okay. And we really should do that. And that, I think, is part of Lee's problem. He has become kind of an icon. He is generationally older than all his subordinates, frankly.
Yep.
Meade is more of a peer, back to this leading your peer business.
Right.
Plus, he's only been in command 4 days. So I think he sees a greater demand to spend that time to get that buy-in, where Lee may assume, I've already got that. I've earned that for the last 16 months.
That's interesting because, I mean, as it's portrayed and as you read about it, I mean, General Longstreet on the Confederate side, I mean, my impression was that he was imploring Lee to rethink this, and he didn't. And I think Longstreet took it as far as he could. But the difference, I think, to take this away, General Meade absolutely saw the benefit, and maybe it was just prudence or necessity to get input from people, and it just was a difference in leadership style. So let's go back to that idea of deciding. And you're right. What does a leader have to do? They have to decide, and they have to decide when to decide. One of the things, Jeff, that you talk about is decision making. You talk about 4 facets to it, that it has to be clear, concise, compelling, and timely. Can you talk a little bit more about the critical nature of that?
Absolutely. It has to be clear. I'll give you an example. The first day of the Battle of Gettysburg, a guy named John Buford will send a message to his boss, in which is very clear. It's about 3 sentences. 1, I have occupied ground to the west of Gettysburg. Number 2, the enemy is here in force. Number 3, bring up the infantry first thing in the morning. Those 3 sentences result in this whole thing happening. Okay? Clear and concise. It's compelling as well, I think, because it goes from Buford to his boss, John Reynolds. And these 2 guys had worked together for a long period of time. So Buford is back to what I like to talk about, leading the boss. He's a 1-star general. Reynolds is a 3-star general. Now, Reynolds could have said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you come back? We'll create a couple of committees. we'll study the problem.
Right.
We'll sing 3 verses of Kumbaya, and then we'll kind of figure out what we're going to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Reynolds, back to trust. Reynolds trusted his subordinate as well as Buford trusting his boss.
Right.
So if that's what John Buford says we should do, that's what we're going to do. And we're going to do it right now. Okay. So we're making decisions at the speed of trust. And that gets back to being timely.
Yep.
Because, again, time is that inelastic resource. The perfect decision is never taken because we're trying to make it perfect. Okay. And I always say, either in battle, certainly, you want to get inside the decision cycle of your opponent. You can make decisions more quickly than your opponent can, higher probability of winning.
Right.
But that particular concept also translates anywhere else. If you're in the business world, if I can make decisions faster than my competition, I have a higher probability of being successful.
Right.
Oh, by the way, I have to make decisions faster than the environment I'm operating in is changing. So there's that constant pressure on the leader, I think, at times, to make timely decisions with good information, while at the same time, how well am I doing getting my organization to buy into them? And how I balance out those variables gets back to timing.
Yeah. You hit on something right there that we talk about a lot, especially when it comes to making decisions about people. And when I have good information, because making decisions on questionable or incomplete information, obviously we can see that it can result in catastrophe. Whenever we do work, we always talk about looking at it through the lens of objective data. I mean, you know some of the tools that we use at Real Good Ventures, but one of the things we like to say, and I borrowed this from Billy Bean. He was from Moneyball, the Oakland Athletics manager for a while.
Oakland Athletics, yep.
Yeah, and he said that data makes transparent all critical decisions, and that's a bit of a paraphrase, but it's true. And I'm sure you see this, Jeff, that in organizations today they talk about change velocity. And it's like, I love how you talk about, what was the statement again? If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less.
Right.
That is so true. But if you don't understand change readiness in your people and yourself and how to navigate that, I just think you're going to fall into that vortex and be just chasing your tail.
I would take you back to Gettysburg again, because one of the big differences between these 2 armies is the Army actually under General Hooker had created for the first time what we would call an intelligence analytical unit.
Okay.
I got a guy who was a lawyer from New York, and he put him in charge of this. And they were using what we would call crude matrices. So they would interview deserters, guys who had been captured, civilians, and from that information, they would try to calculate what units from the Confederate Army had arrived. And by the evening of the second day, this meeting we just talked about, he's able to go to General Meade and say, General Meade, every division in the Confederate Army has been committed except one. The only division that has not been in the fighting yet is Pickett's division. He can lay out all that information for him right there.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So from a data standpoint, I would argue Meade is making an informed decision on what he does the next time. Robert E. Lee has nothing like that.
True.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so he is making intuitive decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this whole idea of data and data analytics becomes very important. Colin Powell used to say P equals 40 to 60, P equals probability of success. And what he meant by that is when you have 40 to 60% of the information you'd like to have,
yeah,
it's time to pull the trigger, because if I keep trying to get 100% of all the information, I'll never make choice.
right.
And in the modern age, I often talk to people and say, I worry that technology discourages leader from making choice because we're constantly bombarded by information, right?
Yeah.
So I can do one more search, I can send out one more survey, whatever, and it sort of encourages me to delay choice. And furthermore, it also discourages initiative, because I was working with to use an illustration, a very large energy corporation, multi-billion-dollar energy corporation, and we're standing up, and we're actually talking about this on the Oak Hill. And this one guy's kind of shaking his head, and I thought he was blowing me off. So you always watch body language. I said, he was a VP. I said, what do you think? And he looked at me and he said, that is so true about technology discouraging choice. He said, my problem is I train a group, I send them out to West Texas, which gives nowhere a whole new meaning. I give them all kinds of resources to build pipelines, right?
Yeah.
Something goes wrong, and what does the guy in charge do? He calls me in Houston, Texas. Well, okay.
Yeah.
I'm 1,500 to 2,000 miles away. He doesn't reach me. So then he sends me a text and an email. And he said, you know what he does then? I said, no, what does he do then? He tells everybody to lean on their shovels until I get back to him.
Oh, boy.
And when he finally gets a hold of me, I said, why in the hell did I bother training you?
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
So I have the boss's cell phone. I pretty much know what I should do, but I have the boss's cell phone. I have John's cell phone.
Yeah.
Therefore, even if I know what to do, hey, I should call John.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of decision-making and technology, I fear that it encourages people to push decisions to the very top just because of access.
Well, I hope you enjoyed part one of my conversation with Jeffrey McCausland as much as I enjoyed having that conversation with him. Trust me, part two will be as rich and as impactful as part one. So make sure you tune in next week for this continuation of Battle Tested with Jeffrey McCausland. See you next week.